Well, welcome to our third ITGL class preview and class preview week. We are so excited that you are joining us today for our Global Trends in Education course. My name is Serena Stewart, and I am Associate Director of Admissions here in the School of Education, and just really happy to welcome you here today. So, do you want to take over, Jennifer?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this is day three of ITGL class preview week. Tomorrow, come back for day four. This slide here shows our ITGL students as they are interacting across campus. You'll see there's pictures of our hackathon events. There's pictures of them at student conferences, at our new student international orientation, as well as that final point at graduation. So all across their student journey, our ITGL students are very involved and have a great community here. So this is just a snapshot of some of the experiences that you'll get to be a part of when you are an ITGL student. So as I said, today is day three of class preview week. Tomorrow is our last class preview with Dr. Ye Shen. She will be going over the language and culture in TEFL class. That one will be same time, 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. So we hope that you can join us for that. And then all of these webinars will also be available on our YouTube channel. So if you missed a class and you want to go back and watch it, you can do that on our YouTube channel. Just give us about a week or so for us to get them posted. But once next week rolls around, if you miss anything, definitely log on and look at a class that you're interested in.
Great,
Go ahead.
great. Um, I want to welcome you here as well. My name is Jennifer Adams, and many of you have been following along with different webinars or information sessions that we've had over the course of the year. So you may be familiar with the ITGL curriculum, but just wanted to highlight here that the ITGL curriculum is typically set up in a way where we have core classes that really reflect cutting edge global foundational knowledge that we believe all people studying global education, leadership, and teaching should be aware of. Also, focus area courses in a selected focus area, applied experiences through extended learning, and then the creation of a global impact portfolio. Most of the courses that you've seen this week or are going to see during ITGL Preview Week are core classes. And so that means that they're classes that we think the content is really essential for people to know in sort of 21st century global education space. And that was true with the Advanced Instructional Strategies class, the Global Leaderships class. And then today I've invited you to join me and some of my really amazing students to get a sample of what we do in the Global Trends in Education course. So a little bit about me. I'm the associate professor in the School of Education. So I work with students in ITGL, but I also advise PhD students and work with students in other programs. I'm the director of ITGL and the faculty advisor for the Applied Research, Early Childhood, and Individualized Focus Areas. I teach courses like the one you're going to see today, Global Trends in Education. I also teach a course, which I'm teaching right now during spring semester, Global Policy and Analysis. And I'm happy to see that two of the students that I have here today, I also have in my policy analysis. And I also teach quantitative methods for the School of Education. So that might be statistics or survey research. And here's just a little bit about me running around. So we're going to sort of start more generally. This course is Global Trends in Education, which is really a foundational international and comparative education course. What do you know about global education? Can any of you, and I want to invite the audience, so if we have people joining us here from around the world, we have current ITGL students here who are going to participate in this conversation with us like they would if they were in class. But if you're an attendee to this webinar, we want to invite you to jump in and chat about some of the questions that we'll be talking about today with us. But can you think of any trends in global education? Let's give our audience a minute. And if not, I'm going to ask my current students to sort of jump in, introduce themselves, and maybe give us a trend in global ed.
For our audience members, you can utilize the chat function to chat with everyone. So if you want to type your answer in the chat, you can do that.
Also, no pressure. You might be more inclined to participate as we like move along. So I'm gonna actually ask Tammy, could you get us started? Just maybe introduce yourself a little bit and like share a little something you know about global education or any of the trends that you're aware of now.
Oh, hi. My name is Tammy, and I'm currently a secondary teacher in South Korea, and I took a global trend last semester, and it was um the most informative and most like enthusiastic class I ever took here. And yeah, I think the currently there are a lot of things going on around globally, and there's a lot of topic that we could discuss when we want to talk about education. But I think definitely climate education, climate related education crisis, and refugee, and these are some of the topics that comes up to me right now. That was some things that we discussed last semester.
Great. That's great. Actually, and we are going to talk about climate a little bit today. And I'm also going to ask you to talk about your podcast project a little bit, which also hits on the refugee topics. What about you, Suja?
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Jia. I'm currently a graduate student in the ITGL program. My focus area is entrepreneur in education, and my background is in education and literacy. And I think, it, sorry, wait. Oh. I think the global education it emphasized developing global awareness, cultural understanding, and a sense of responsibility for global challenges such as climate change and educational inequality. From my perspective, global education also encourages students to think critically about global issues and to become active global citizens.
Oh yeah, we love creating global citizens. That's one of the things we're trying to do in Global Trends. Yes. And Clarence, what about you?
Um, Hi everyone, my name is Clarence, made in China, and I study in a ITGL program. For me, I think the global education is more like a group of people, or like people are all around the world, trying to see the problems beyond their own country and culture. And I feel like global education is like really approach to learn like that help people to understand the world beyond their uh, own local problem and experience in wider world context. I think the global trends I was thinking about definitely crisis and conflicts. I think that's a big problem in all over the world. So pretty
Great.
interesting.
Thanks, you guys. Great. So, oh, I see Liz here. I'm familiar with global education in the context of intercultural education in terms of providing culturally relevant education. One of the global trends in education is multilingual learners emerging from the trends of migration, immigration, and refugees. And Liz, that's absolutely right. And I think actually not this slide, but the next one, you'll actually see that we are focused on part of that issue in one of the sections of this course. And also, I would encourage you, if you're interested in multilingualism, to tune in for Dr. Shen's class tomorrow on language and culture, because that's really her research area of expertise. One of the things I really enjoy about teaching in ITGL in general, and then also about the Global Trends class, is because I think Clarence just presented this very sort of optimistic view, I think, of the world, in that we're talking in this class about challenges from the climate crisis to refugee education to migration to inequality to the promise and perils of AI. But the people that are in the global trends class, I feel like, and then I think generally in ITGL, are people that are thinking about how can we actually marshal education to help us address these global challenges, right? So I find being with ITGL students like every day, like a really sort of inspiring, optimistic place to think about some of the global challenges that we're confronting. In the global education trends in education course, really the goal is for all students people are coming in with very different backgrounds to be able to identify key global trends that are impacting what we do in education, how we think about education, access to education, quality innovation around the world. And so we hope that students, when they leave the course, will be able to identify, describe, analyze some of these challenges, right, that are posed by globalization around the world, but also sort of be able to critically reflect on the implication of these trends for things we care about in education, such as equity, access, innovating in new ways. And so the course is really built around learning about these topics, but also thinking about what can we learn from research about these topics? How can we sort of synthesize this research evidence? And then explore creative strategies together to try to address these global challenges. And in doing so, the way the course is set up, we also really try to emphasize sort of creativity, critical thinking, and I would say also communication, because part of the ways we think about addressing global challenges requires bringing people together from different spaces. And so we really work on that sort of 21st century communication and collaboration skills. The course is really divided up into 5 sections in terms of topics, and we spend a few, 3 weeks-ish on each one, and it's broken into smaller spaces. But more generally, these topics begin with an introduction to the field in general about what global and international education is. What are some of the big trends that we're seeing around the world? What does the space look like after sort of the COVID crisis? And then also the role of international organizations in, shaping some of the questions, discourses, responses to some of these issues. Then we spent a few weeks on global education and the climate crisis, and that is partially motivated by some of my own research in this space. And this is pretty consistent with Johns Hopkins faculty members trying to bring their own research ideas into the classroom, right? Related to what Liz was just talking about, we have a few weeks that we talk about global migration, mobility, and education, and that can be related to both migration itself, but also the refugee crisis around the world, and then also international student mobility. So really large topic. We spent a little time looking at global education and technology, including AI, and then end with a discussion focused on the global investment in early childhood education worldwide. And of course, this is just a selection of the topics that are available to talk about in the field, but and these can change like year to year, but this is what we actually worked on this year. The course is set up. This is sort of the assignment structure for the courses. And so students do reflection papers a few times during the semester. Students sign up for the different weeks that they want to do reflection papers. And so with that, that allows us to bring in different voices to the class during different periods in the course. And so I typically look at these reflection papers prior to the week that we discuss the topic. And so sometimes I ask students to read sections of their reflection papers, or sometimes I call on students in class and say, oh, Clarence, I just did this to Clarence yesterday in actually global policy, because he had a great idea in his reflection paper, and I asked him to share that in class. And so that's a strategy that we also use in the global trends class so that people can bring their own experience into the classroom. The class is built from an assignment structure around a podcast project. And so you can see here that it's a mix of individual and also group assignments that lead towards a podcast, a group constructed podcast on a topic that you choose related to the field of global and international education. So students do some of this work themselves, and so they submit a topic of interest at the beginning of the course so I can help group people with similar interests in the the field. And then later in the course, they submit a research evidence paper that needs to be related to their podcast topic in some way. And I find that this actually gives students more background knowledge about the research evidence that exists around their podcast topic. But they also work in groups by submitting a group podcast and proposal plan after they've come together and been grouped around a common topic. And they part of the podcast project is not only gathering research evidence to answer a research question in a podcast format, but they also interview an expert in the field. And I'll let these guys talk about that in a minute. But one of the things you do submit is the interview question, so we can make sure the interview questions will help you get the most out of the interview. And then at the final for the course is actually submitting the podcast with a transcript, and that's the final project for the course. And then throughout the course, students are evaluated on their engagement, participation, attendance in the actual course. And here's just a selection of some of the podcast topics that the fall group actually did. And so boarded classrooms, North Korean defector students, resettlement and education. That was Tammy and her group did that one. Resilience in crisis, education in post-coup Myanmar, and Clarence's group did that one. You can see other topics here, but I'm going to jump down to number 6. Can remote learning truly narrow the education gap? What does equity mean for remote learning? And Sija's group actually worked on that project. So I was just going to invite the students to talk maybe a little bit about maybe your own podcast, but just the process of the podcast assignment, like share a little bit. Some students find it a little bit of a new experience. And so if you could just share your experience working on the podcast and like what you thought, that would be great. Anyone can go first.
Well, I can go first. I think podcast assignment was really interesting because it required us not only to research a topic, but also to communicate complex ideas in a clear and engaging way. And I remember that my group interviewed a researcher from Canada. And before the interview, we designed about 10 questions, and Professor Adams reviewed them and gave us practical feedback, especially encouraging us to ask more how and why questions so the interviewee could elaborate more. And then we recorded and edited the podcast ourselves. I think it was a very creative and hands-on assignment. And honestly, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Anyone else? Clarence, Tammy?
Okay, I'll go first. Our group was like focusing on the Myanmar's refugee education, and I think it's a really interesting topic and a interesting experience because when you are talking to the like the Myanmar minister, you can actually know a lot of information that you cannot get from the Google Scholar, from the AI, definitely. But before doing the interview, we definitely do a lot of research and trying to understand what happened in Myanmar. But yeah, I think like when you do the interview, because I'm the host in our group, so I have to lead the questions. So every time when minister go too far and like kind of like jumping from first question to second question, I have to kind of like pull back. But yeah, my podcast really give me like a clear sense on what happened in Myanmar, especially the children's there. So it helped me to see the education is not like only about schooling, but also about like safety, access, and a large political context. So yeah,
Yeah.
interesting experience.
It was, I mean, Clarence's group's podcast was crazy. It was so interesting and good. And I feel like the person you were interviewing, wasn't he hiding somewhere during the actual interview?
Yes.
Right?
He's like I can't turn on my video right now because it's just we just have like a crisis like 20 minutes ago, so I have to hide myself, self-protected. I can't turn on the light. So hope everything just working. I was like,
Right.
oh, please be safe.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really real life on the ground information. And just I'm going to let Tammy jump in. But also, the podcast, I found them so creative. So, students really brought their research knowledge to the assignment. But at the same time, some groups added music and some had special titles. And some of them did like a YouTube podcast that you would watch, but some of them were more like a radio podcast that you would listen to. And so, really allowed the different groups to bring their own creative energy to usually a topic that students were feeling really passionate about. And with that, I just want to let Tammy share a minute, and then we're going to get ready to pop into like a little bit of a mini lesson.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like I felt like this podcast project really connected the what we learn as theories and what we do like in words into actual field, and how we felt how we were able to see and feel how the education that we are talking about is like uh, 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 rolled out in the real world. And I think the process of the project, the essence is the teamwork. We had a wonderful team. I mean, I had a wonderful team,
Okay, there
and
was a good team.
yeah, and we all like pulled our weight and had all the right role in interviewing the expert and gathering the information, making the question, and all the process was very rewarding. Um, and the topic it was something that I had been interested in for a very long period of time, and I was very happy to actually interview someone who's working in the field uh, with the enthusiasm.
Great. Thank you, guys. This is one of my favorite assignments. So I learned so much from all the students as they're working on this. So just wanted to highlight that that's really the way we focus our energy on this in this course, and also the idea that the podcast assignment sort of reflects sort of foundational ideas about the way that we are assessing students, right? So the idea that students can demonstrate what they know in different modes, like in different ways. So there is a classic research paper in the course, a research evidence paper, but also students demonstrate what they know in a more creative, communicative, 21st century skill type way. Also, the different configurations of both individual responsibility and assignments, but also assignments that are part of reflect the real world where often you're doing things with groups of people, the opportunity to learn from feedback. And so this podcast work is submitted in several stages. So it really gives you a chance to develop your ideas. And then also just the important piece of sort of learning engagement. So being engaged in the podcast, being engaged with your group work. And then I think the reflective papers and emphasis on class participation reflect the idea that we want people really engaged in the topics that they're working on. And I think overall, this actually reflects sort of the pedagogical approach that we use in the global trends class. And so really emphasizing both interactive discussion, which I'm hoping we'll have a little bit of in a few minutes, and then also the idea of applied learning practice. And I think these happen in different ways in the course, but when I say applied learning practice, I've got some things highlighted over here in red on the right, meaning sort of the opportunity to do experiential work, to develop professional skills that you would be using in the real world, this idea of learning by doing, but also the interactive discussion piece is a way for us to foster knowledge, like learning content knowledge, but also the ability to critically think about that knowledge and then also communicate with others about these topics that we care about. And I think both of them taken together also help all of our students develop their language skills in a more professional way as well. So with that, for a few minutes, I just wanted to, and I was just joking around with the students, is that they think they would tell you that I often don't make it through all of my course slides because we spend so much time discussing topics in class. So we'll see how far we get with this discussion, but we wanted to just give you a little bit of a sample of what are some of the things we talk about and sort of this interaction between sharing information and having classroom discussions. So we're going to do a little mini lesson right now from the section of the course on global education and the climate crisis. In the course, we spend 3 weeks talking about this topic, sort of shifting through what is a very large topic, but just to different areas. And so, starting with the effect of climate on children and schooling, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Moving into climate change education the next week, where we talk about how the teachers approach actually teaching about this topic. And then finally, moving into global citizenship education and the role that climate change education plays in this space, right? So today I'm just adapting a little bit of what we did when we were actually talking about the effects of climate on children's schooling. You can see up in the right-hand corner the preparation that the students did before they actually came to class for this work. So they read a pretty comprehensive review of evidence paper from the World Bank Observer about the impact of extreme weather events on educational outcomes. And then also listened to a podcast. And that's something that we also use in this course as an instructional method, not every week, but probably at least half of the time. Instead of a reading for this course, instead of just assigning an extra article or an extra chapter in a book, students actually listen to a podcast about the topic. And so they listen to the podcast Education in the Time of Climate Crisis. So, big course in global trends in education, right? Why are we learning about this, right? Why is the topic of climate change relevant just in the field of international and comparative education in general? Thoughts from the audience, thoughts from my students?
I can go.
Sure.
So I'm thinking like climate change matters in this global education field because education does not happen separately from the world. So I feel like climate disaster happens and schools and students get affected, but we are still like thinking a way that we can overcome those climate change. Uh, I feel like it's kind of related to the emergency in education, because when the disaster happen, we have to like think about way that students or like schools or schooling system can keep working. So I feel like every minutes, in everywhere we have these issues. That's why it is always a comparative and global education issues.
I would agree with that. I think particularly the crisis piece. I'm actually working on a research paper right now with an alumni from ITGL who works at UNICEF. And like part of our framework for the paper is actually putting climate or the way children are affected by climate into that conceptual framework of conflict and crisis, right? So climate actually as a form of crisis. Tammy, Sajad, you have anything you want to add there?
I mean,
Yeah,
I think, okay.
you can first, Tammy.
You guys are so nice to each other.
I mean, this is what happens in the class, right? Everyone
Yeah.
wants to speak up. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think climate change is something that is that impacts every country, but the impact is kind of like unequal. Like some countries, it's not the result. The cause is like global, but the result that some countries are more affected and more the education is more disrupted, but other countries they are not so affected. So I think we need it's something that the global community have to collaborate to build resilience.
Resilience, yeah. So, Ja, anything you want to piggyback
Yeah,
on there?
yeah, I agree with Tammy because climate change it directly affects education systems, not just the environment. Extreme weather, migration, and economic instability can interrupt schooling and widen educational inequality across countries. And from a comparative education perspective, it also raises questions about how different countries respond through education policy and curriculum, such as climate education and sustainability. Yeah.
Yeah. This just even like your small responses makes me sad that we have like 15 minutes to talk about this right now. But yeah, all of these ideas. So I think the idea of educational disruption, which is what I'm going to really try to focus on today as we're talking about this, like how children are affected by climate actually disruption is a theme that runs through the course, but also the idea of education inequality, which both actually everybody raised this idea of climate actually impacting people like in different ways. And then of course this comparative framework that Sajia posed, and as well as what can we do about it as from like a policy perspective, right? So on the next slide here, I just have some general ideas of answering this question, sort of thinking beyond this conversation, but for everybody in the audience. And I think our students have hit some of these ideas, right? That climate change has a disproportionate impact on low-income countries, right? And also disproportionately, while it affects everybody, it disproportionately affects vulnerable populations within countries, particularly children, which is why we're really focused on this today. That it's fueling educational inequality and social inequality, partially through disruption, but partially through migration and also economic shocks that are associated with climate change. We also care about it as policymakers because of the connections to the Sustainable Development Goals, right? I'm highlighting goals 13 and 4.7 here. In addition, people that are interested in green skills, right, as foundational skills or social emotional learning as a foundation there. Tammy mentioned the idea of resilient education, which is something that we see coming up. How do we make the next generation more resilient in the face of the climate crisis? It's also related to the broader area of school safety, right? And also digital learning and tech. How can digital learning and tech and innovation help us jump in when education is disrupted because of climate? Clarence mentioned the education and emergencies piece related to displacement and conflict. And then those of us in the field that are interested really in development can't really be in that space without thinking about sustainability and innovation and the role green skills actually have in development in many countries. I think for the sake of time, I am going to sort of move quickly through the next couple slides so we can sort of talk more about disruption, but just wanted to give a sense that in a course like this, I would be providing sort of an overview here on education and sustainable development. I think one of the things you could actually notice just briefly from this slide is the idea that education for sustainable development has been around for a long time. So we're seeing a huge amount of focus on climate change education right now, but this slide traces back to the 1970s when we first started talking about environmental education and then education for sustainable development. And now we talk more about education and climate change. So similarly, I mean, we're going to just sort of talk briefly. I think you guys have mentioned a little bit this idea of disruption, but how do you think the climate crisis actually affects children? Like we just talked about them being sort of a vulnerable population. How are children most affected by climate?
I am thinking like children, because I feel like children, especially young kids, are one of the most vulnerable group in this topic. They are like most likely to suffer when like school close or like when family lose their income because of the climate change. And also I feel like when the climate change happens, every country it's equal because of the climate change, but the education resources is not equal at all. So I feel like climate change can take away children's um, opportunities, and when communities are damaged by the climate events, those childrens are not only like drop out from school, but also like maybe they have like safety or like uh less of support, those kind of issues.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think when we think, I'm going to just ask, can we move on to the next slide, Serena? Because I'm going to try to move quickly in the middle here for the sake of time. But one of the things, I think everything that Clarence just mentioned is like right on. And I think one of the things we think about that is sort of bringing in a developmental perspective when we think about how children are affected by climate. So here you can see basically versions of Brockenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which is, common perspective or conceptual framework that we use actually thinking about children. the school is really located in the mesosymptom system. So this is really like a layered view of development with sort of children in the middle, but thinking about all the different contexts in which children grow and develop, right? So you see the individual child in the center, but then they grow up in this tight sort of family peer environment, in a microsystem. Often we see beyond that sort of a school system or communities or different types of contexts that children actually operate in, neighborhoods, for example, sort of all of the systems sort of pushing out, right? So we see children in the center, but them nested in many different types of communities. I think one of the things we think about when we think about climate change and its effect on children is really the effect of climate almost on every single level of the system, right? So a family can be affected by a climate crisis like a drought or extreme flooding, for example, that could displace the family or have economic shocks for the family unit or health problems or school displacement, but also may affect the community, affect the nation, affect many levels of the child's development. So when we think about development and the role, the impact of climate, we're often thinking about what are the risks for children at different levels of the system, but also how we can actually create protective factors to buffer these risks for children from the effect of climate change. So in my work, I've been thinking about this for some time. So these are actually just some photographs that I took when I was in Sichuan and Gansu province after the Wenchuan earthquake in 2008, where millions of children were affected by school closures. Actually, during that time, there were roughly 7,000 schools that were destroyed. And you can see over on the left-hand side, the tents where families were living after homes had fallen because of the earthquakes. But you also see on the right-hand side that very quickly the Chinese government erected temporary school structures to get children back into the school environment because school was a safe place for children to be and a place that brought sort of continuity and routine and allowed their families to sort of get back to building and developing their lives. And so you see pictures of children being brought to these makeshift schools very soon after the earthquake, actually. And so here I just wanted to highlight that the earthquake that we saw there, the Wenchuan earthquake, which is on my list here towards the bottom. And again, this is not a comprehensive list at all, but education has been disrupted by climate-induced disasters in countries around the world here. So you can see many different places and also many different types of climate disruption. I tried to put more recent disruptions at the top from 2025, from extreme flooding in China to the very significant typhoon that I actually think was occurring during global trends in the fall, because we were looking at videos of it, the typhoon that slammed into the Philippines and Vietnam in November of 2025, and then also the fires that we've seen in the United States that have also prevented children from going to school. Here's another example of just data and information that we want to share about this actually topic. So this is giving us a look at the number of natural disaster type events that have happened around the world during this period. And we can see that, you know, slight increases there, but really sort of steady and then some increasing crises in the last 10-ish years. And so these are the number of natural disaster events, many of which actually do affect the educational experiences of young kids. And then here, I think in class, I often try to do a little bit of a guess around this, but since we're here just in slides, like thinking about what countries are most affected by natural disasters. So if we look at the number of natural disasters around the world, and this is looking at 2024, because that's 2025 data, people are often surprised to see that the United States is actually one of the countries that experiences the most in terms of natural disasters, but also countries where we have students in our program here. So we see Indonesia being in second place this year. I believe that was not the case last year, that has moved up. Indonesia has experienced a lot of natural disasters this year. China, also very susceptible to typhoons and actually flooding. The Philippines, India, Brazil, Vietnam, that we see countries in many diverse contexts affected by natural disasters that end up affecting students' educational experiences and also their lives. And so with this, we think about the different mechanisms of educational disruption. So educational disruption is one of the things that, Clarence mentioned in his conversation, and also that, Tammy and Sidja have referenced as well. And so I think we can think it makes a lot of sense to think about schools being closed, right? So schools might be closed because of destruction, damage, etc. But we also see educational disruption because of infrastructure damage around the schools. Sometimes families have to migrate either temporarily or permanently because of the actual migration need because of climate disruption. Sometimes teachers can't actually make it to schools because of the disruption they're experiencing in their own lives. And so this results in teacher shortages. We see economic shocks that impact communities and families. There's a whole area that's focusing on both physical health and mental health, and then actually trauma. So there are several different mechanisms that disrupt education for children around the world. And then also here, just highlighting a little bit of what we saw actually in the research. And so some of this research is related to the information that students read in World Bank Observer, but also other research that we would have pulled into the course that natural disasters affect many different types of educational outcomes. There isn't a huge amount of research empirically unraveling what these effects are. The existing research tells us that there are adverse effects on both kids going to school, but also on their ability to complete the school, and also their cognitive scores, right? So sustained climate events or sustained school flooding over time, for example, doesn't just have school students leave school temporarily. It might also affect their ability to do well over time and what they actually learn, right? And so in our course, we've talked a little bit about this idea of learning poverty and like what children actually learn while they're in school. There are differential impacts of different types of disasters, with flooding being one of the most harmful. There's also research that suggests that the cumulative impact of several small disasters is more harmful than one severe, right, disaster on individuals, but also communities. If you think about it, some of these big disasters that I mentioned, international organizations or governments come in and provide resources for the people affected by these big disasters, but people that experience cumulative small disasters over time often don't have the resources or the attention to help them actually pull out of the effects of actual disaster. So one of the things, again, we're going to run out of time, but one of the things that the podcast was about for this week, and then also that people just sort of brought in from their own experiences, is trying to think about, given the climate crisis and this time where children and also children's families, right, are increasingly affected by the climate crisis, what should the role of education be? And here I'm going to invite people from the audience, but also my students to chime in with what is the role of education in a time of climate crisis? So yeah, I can see your, yeah.
Well, I think education should play several roles. The first one, that will be climate literacy. Education should help students understand climate science and sustainability. And for example, school might teach students how carbon emission affect the planet. Well, the second that will be empowerment. Young people should be seen as active participants in climate solutions instead of victims. And the third, that will be resilience and adaptation. And I think schools can help students and communities to prepare for climate-related challenges. For example, school in disaster-prone areas may teach emergency and support students' mental health after climate-related disasters. From when I was young, my teacher always said, if the snow stop, we need to take our shawl to the school.
Thanks, Sidya. And all of those things, I'm going to invite Tammy and, to jump in if they want to, but I'm just emphasizing three of the things that I heard Sidya mention And they're really different, sort of different approaches in this space, right? So one is like climate literacy and awareness. So she's arguing that we should be teaching children about climate like in school, right? She also suggested this idea of empowerment, which I think is really important. Research suggests that there is this like we have to sort of thread the needle. If we teach children sort of too much about the crisis without giving them tools to feel empowered to solve it, often children might develop eco-anxiety or a feeling of hopelessness. Like, why should I do anything about the climate? The planet's just burning, right? We don't want students to feel hopeless. We want students to feel empowered for change, which leads to the third point that Sajjan mentioned, which is about climate adaptation. Like, how can we teach children to be resilient and think about what the future might look like in a time of climate adaptation? Clarence, Tammy, do you guys have anything you want to add on there?
Um, I just wanted to add from Sija that I think she talked about like climate literacy, but like last class even we talked about how education the knowledge how education what's the education's role in changing the knowledge to behavioral change. So
Right.
I think one of the major role in education about the climate crisis is how we can change this literacy into action and make students be active in their field.
Yes, big puzzle, big problem for education. But one of the things that, a big puzzle to think about once children are aware of the climate crisis, how do we change people's actual behavior and empower them to think that their behavior matters? Often people think, oh, I'm just one person. What I do doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to recycle or turn off the faucet because it's just me and everyone else is doing it, right? So how do we think about individual behavior change and then also behavior change actually at scale? And I think given time, I'm actually going to skip this one, Serena, a little bit. But can you go back for just 1 second? I just want to mention it. Sorry. Thank you for controlling my slides. I think one of the things in the beginning of Global Trends that we talk about is the overall sort of purpose of schooling and how there are more humanitarian and more utilitarian economics purposes that when we think about why governments invest in education, right? And so one of the things we try to do is like link this back to our earlier discussions about how does the climate crisis actually affect the way we think about what the purpose of education actually is. And that connects to partially to the podcast that we listened to this week about schooling in a time of climate crisis, right? Where the podcast actually does talk about the school strike for climate movement around the world. And this links to what Sijia was talking about, I think, with empowerment, that this idea that the children's rights of a child, right, that children have a right to participate in and influence decision-making processes that are relevant to their lives, right? And if we believe and embrace this statement from the UN, what does that mean for what education actually looks like? And I feel like I remember we had a pretty thriving conversation about people who felt like teenagers should be out in the streets and striking for climate, and others in our class that felt like they should be like in the classroom learning about how to adapt to the climate crisis. Does anyone want to give any final sort of thoughts about this idea about school strike for climate and the role of youth actually in being empowered to think about climate change, just as a way to wrap up?
I
Yeah,
feel
Clarence.
in our uh education experience, like in especially in middle school and high school, we will make like a poster on the blackboard. So we definitely cover some topic about climate change, and every month, not like every month, but like 1 or 2 months, school like have a topic. Sometimes it's like climate change, and each classroom like we will have like 10 students making a like blackboard poster, and school will like take pictures and try to vote which one is the best. So I see this as a part of like a school strike for climate. Like student can kind of participate, share their opinions through the images and the drawings and maybe like some of the words. So yeah.
Thanks, Clarence. I think, and with that, since I know we're at time and Serena's got a few wrap up things, I want to thank everyone for joining in to this little mini discussion about the effect of climate on children and invite you to get in touch with any of us if you have questions about this class or the program.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Adams, and thank you to all of the students who are joining us here today. Before we wrap up our webinar, I do want to leave about 5 minutes for questions, so I'm going to go through these quickly. The ITGL application for fall of 2026 is still open, so there is still time to apply if you have not yet applied. An online application is required. You can find that information on our website to apply. It requires an $80 application fee, the submission of your resume, and the essay prompt, which you'll find in the application. 2 letters of recommendation, one of them from a professor, an instructor, somebody who worked with academically, who knows you. And then the other recommender can also be academic or could be someone maybe from a research project that you were working on or an internship or something like that. You'll need your official transcripts from all the colleges that you've attended post-secondary or course-by-course evaluations if you have done your education outside of the United States or English-speaking Canada. And then you'll also require an English language proficiency exam if you are not a citizen of the United States and have not studied in an education system post-secondary where English was the language of instruction. So if you have any questions about any of those application requirements, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Like I mentioned, the application is still open now until April 30th. And then for the audience members out there who have an offer of admission, your offer of your first deposit is due 2 weeks, and your offer response is due 2 weeks after you receive your decision. And then there is a final non-refundable enrollment deposit due by June 15th. So that would take us to the end of our admissions cycle for fall of 2026. I do see some comments and questions in the chat and some additional things. So we'll get to those right now. And then just to end our webinar, if there's anything that we don't get to answer today or that you have questions about afterwards, you can always contact myself or Dr. Adams.
Great, great. So yeah, I see a question here too. It's from Wu Lin Lin, and I'd actually love for her to clarify it a little bit more if she's still here. So it says here that the US has contributed to a lot of other countries' development, not only in the education area, but also in other academic fields. However, I'm thinking that's like some countries are going to gain their own success, even surpass the US in different areas. So are you still wanting to help them? And I'm not sure if that is targeted towards the United States. Like, would the United States still be willing to help them? And looking forward to discussing this. And so I don't know that I can actually speak for the US, just as me, Jennifer Adams, Wu Lin Lin, but I would say, like, in this course, we really try to think about issues such as climate or education as something that where I think Clarence actually said this at the beginning, right? That there's like global responsibility, right? And I think actually Sijia and Tammy have both had that orientation, right? We take on this idea of inequality, right? And we think about who vulnerable populations are. And in the case of climate, we know that countries that are producing, effects that harm the climate are not always the countries that are actually affected by the climate. And so we think about this idea of global citizenship and and actually there's research that shows this, right? That people that see themselves as citizens of the world, right? That see themselves connected to something bigger than their own national identity are often more likely to engage in behaviors that positively affect the climate because they see it as a global responsibility rather than just something that is not just living in their own pocket of the world. And so again, can't speak to the US government, but can speak to the perspective that we take in thinking about some of these educational and global challenges in the course.
Any other questions from our audience before we wrap up today?
I want to thank the students for being here on what is an early time of day for most graduate students. So thank you for getting up in the US and participating in this class preview with us. And also just to plug that, I think if you are a prospective ITGL student, I think one of the things that students don't often think about is that one of the best resources of this program are your classmates. And I hope that you saw that here today, that we have really excellent, interesting students in the program. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for being here. And one last time, I will just remind you that tomorrow we're doing it again for our last class preview. So join us tomorrow for Dr. Shen's class preview in TEFL. Enjoy
Thanks,
the rest of your day.
Bye.